All right, hello, my remote students. I'm going to go over these with you. Please email me if you have any questions. For the most part, other than the opinion questions like the last one, I believe, well, it's not really an opinion. Anyway, these are the correct answers. Um, I think it's important to make sure you guys go through this so that you can just make sure that you have the right answers. And what I'd like you to do is unsubmit your documents and just add to what you've already got. Put it in a different color font, highlight it, whatever you add. I think that that's a good thing to do. That way I see that you went through and checked your material against what I have. Okay, now um, sometimes I leave things out, so don't delete anything you have. Okay, so let's go through this here. This is Unit 3, Module 11, and I'll do Unit 3, Module 12 next. Okay, so Module 11, it was on Europe in the early Middle Ages. Okay, so other than geographic advantages, what other reasons do you think allowed the Byzantine Empire to flourish while the Western Roman Empire fell? So if you remember from our Roman unit, Byzantine Empire is the eastern half of the whole Roman Empire. They flourished for about 1,000 years after the Western Roman Empire fell. So we know that they had geographical advantages for where they were located. They were easily protected. They had good trade. Okay, they're kind of in a spot that's between Asia and Europe, so there's good, travel and trade between there. So we know that. We know geographically they had advantages. Okay, so here's what I think you could add to your answers. Okay, I believe that it was their ability to trade and have relative peace with those around them. I think it was partially due to a one-mindedness about religion as well, because they were fully Christian, if you recall from the reading, and the unity that Christianity brought, for the most part, to the empire. Okay, I think that those are the two biggest reasons: the fact that they had relative peace with those around them, like the Kievan Rus, for instance, and sometimes with the Islamic empires. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, in what ways, if any, was the collapse of the Byzantine Empire similar to the collapse of the Western Roman Empire? So they're getting attacked constantly. Well, not constantly, but they're getting attacked over a 1,000-year period of time. They're losing land from Africa to Italy, so on and so forth. When that happens, you lose economic power because you're losing some of the resources that you had before, right? So their economy begins to collapse, right? Also, you're spending more money on military to protect yourself, right? So their economy collapses, their military is becoming weaker, they couldn't maintain their territories. And so really that's one of the big similarities between the two. Okay. All right, so then we move on to the Kievan Rus, who are just north and kind of just north, actually, of the Byzantine Empire. Okay, and the Kievan Rus are going to be the first Russians, really. Today, Kiev is in the Ukraine, which is a country that used to be part of the United Soviet States of Russia. That's a whole nother story. Okay, so do you think they were successful for a while? Do you think the Kievan Rus would have been as successful if they had not converted to Christianity? What if they had converted to a different religion? So let's talk about that for a second. Who was their main trading partner? Exactly, it was the Byzantines. So the Byzantines are their main trading partner. They're Christians. They'd had some trading deals with some conversions and things like that. And so it made sense if their main trading partners are Christian, because Western Europe also is another main trading partner, the Western Europe places. There's Christianity there as well. So if your main trading partners are Christians, it would make sense that you would be fairly prosperous because you are of a similar mindset. Okay. Whereas trading was not as good with Islamic folks because there's a different mindset, right? So if the Kievan Rus, for instance, had this is um, not 100% fact. This is me reasoning out through the facts that we know what I believe the answer to be. So I think things would have been more difficult if they would have converted to something else, like Islam, because of the conflict between Islam and Christianity during the time, right? The Crusades are coming up. The Mongols are invading. So you have those things to consider right there. So I think with my reasoning from the facts that we know, that no, they would not have been as successful. Why do you think the Rus settled for trade negotiations with Constantinople instead of capturing it like they did with many other surrounding territories? This kind of goes back to question number one, except for we add in Constantinople's geographical advantages. Okay. Constantinople is at the end of a peninsula. Okay. They have a waterway to protect them. You've got to have a good navy in order to, breach that. And they've got a long peninsula, which at the end is big high walls to protect themselves. So they can still bring food and stuff in through the waterways. And they've got big high walls with a decent army to protect themselves. So it makes more sense economically to have peace with them and trade with them instead of trying to conquer them and burning up valuable resources like your people or money or whatnot, right? If you think about all the money spent throughout the world on military actions, of course, the United States is number one in this. There's trillions of dollars spent. Think about, now I'm not advocating for this, but these things come into my mind, right? Think about the monies that could be spent on improving our nation as a whole to start with, instead of protecting other nations, which I understand why we do it. And I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying, hey, think about this for a second, because they are things that we should think about so that we can constantly improve ourselves as a people in the future. Okay. All right. So let's move on, right? There's only a couple questions per here. So let's move on to Charlemagne's Empire and the Carolingian. Say that. Say it slowly. Carolingian. It's a tough word to say at first, and even especially if you're looking at it. So just sound it out, Carolingian, or just repeat after me, Carolingian. That is Charlemagne's empire. Okay, Charlemagne took the kingdoms that his father had and united them. Okay, as well as conquered some more territory. Eventually, is named Holy Roman Emperor, which he kind of forces the Pope to do, but that's a whole nother story. You guys can look that up if you'd like. But he kind of, he's named Holy Roman Emperor. He has all these reforms and things like that. So let's look at this first question here, or the number 5. What qualities made Charlemagne known as the Great, and what other qualities made him not as great as he may be perceived? So I like to look at the negatives first and follow it up with the positives. The not so great of Charlemagne was his intolerance of pagan religions within his empire and areas he controlled and conquered. Now, let me make a caveat before I read the next sentence. He did not, even though he was at war with the Saxons, he didn't massacre until they attacked first. Does that justify what he did? No, it doesn't. I just wanted to put a caveat in there because it's always good to think about these things, because there's sociological and psychological things that are going on at the same time. It's not just history. You have to look at the person themselves to understand why they do the things they do. So, to continue on, he massacred and deported thousands of Saxons because of this intolerance. Okay? Those are really the biggest negatives, I think. The great part of Charlemagne was that he was very concerned with education of his people, especially the priests and monks that he learned were in large part illiterate. He established schools. He required monks and priests to learn to read and write. Had texts copied, which increased the literacy rates immensely. Reorganized the government to run more efficiently, kept better records, and during his time, many new inventions and practices were implemented for agriculture, which increased crop yield and efficiency, which is also going to increase the health of your folks. Okay, so good and bad. The good don't justify the bad that he did. Okay, they don't wipe it clean. When we study people in history, we have to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's just the way it is. People are people. They're imperfect. They're going to make mistakes. Okay? Let's check out this one. Number 6. Why was Charlemagne's conversion to Christianity so important for the Carolingian Empire and the rest of European history? Well, because of the importance he placed on education and knowledge because of his beliefs. It brought about a lot of positive changes that would come to affect Europe for ages to come, right? So we're looking at different universities that have been founded throughout history, scientific breakthroughs, increase in literacy. All these things are going to have an effect on the future. Okay. So now let's jump back. Let's jump over to the Vikings. Okay. So let's hold on. Charlemagne. Eventually, he's going to die. He doesn't really have the best successorship lined up, right? So he doesn't have someone to take his place specifically. So his kingdom is split in 3. It lasts for a little while, but then it's going to turn into some different things, okay, to include France and things like that, okay? So let's check out Vikings. What is Viking? Is it a people? What do you think? No, it's not a people. Okay? Viking is a verb. It means to go out and pillage and destroy and plunder. Okay? So, why do we have these misconceptions about these people who were in large part farmers from Scandinavian areas? Okay? So, a lot of them come from myths and legends. There's an epic poem called Beowulf. Okay, and I challenge you guys to read it. There's a guy named he's passed away now, but there's an author named Seamus Heaney out there, and he has a great rendition because he has the original text, and then on the side he kind of explains because some of the words are a little more difficult because they're old style language. Okay, but he writes a story called, or he shows a story called Beowulf, which is all about these myths and legends, and how Vikings kind of got their name a little bit. But stories, and he was the original writer of this wasn't a Viking or a Scandinavian, and he wasn't from the time period when the story happened, right? So I'm sure he's going on tales and myths and legends and things like that. So myth and legend are part of the reason, okay? They only saw the Scandinavians outside their homeland. So all they saw was the pillaging that they did. All right. And again, most of the time, they were just peaceful farmers. So that leads us to number 8. Why did other countries want to recruit Scandinavians more than other militants? It's actually a pretty simple answer. They didn't have any political affiliations or cares outside of their own local concerns. So if you were hiring them to do one job 1,000 miles away, they're like, okay, as long as you pay me, I don't care. I just care about the stuff going on at home. So let me go and fight for you, and I'll get paid, and I'll take that money back home. Right? So it made them really good. They were also pretty fierce, and they were good fighters. Okay? All right. So let's check out these last couple questions here, because we're going to move on to Alfred and England and the unification of England. Okay, Alfred was a strong king. He was sickly. He had some health issues, but he actually wasn't too bad a king. He really tried to do his best for people. Okay, so how did the Danes influence the rule of Alfred the Great and the development of England? So the Danes and the English, they're always fighting. The English weren't completely unified, so it didn't help anything. when the Danes attacked all the time and conquered places like London. Okay, so the burg system, right? If you think about what the burg system was, it was this system of towns and roads throughout Alfred's territory that had towns that were fortified and better roads, right? So that way the people could come into the towns when they were under attack by the Danes, and the road system allowed for faster communication. And because all the cities were connected, all the burgs, armies could get there faster to support the other armies. So I think personally that the burg system was huge. I think also just humility. He was able to accept defeat and then go back after it, right? So humility and maybe even tenacity of will, going after what he thought was right, which was the unification of England. Okay, which quality of King Alfred, this is number 10, which quality of King Alfred do you think made him great and why? So I said that it was his ruling on past and future judgments. He wanted to be as fair and consistent and equal as possible. So he's always looking to past judgments to inform on what he was doing in the present. He wanted everybody to have equal punishments. For the most part, he cut out the death penalty. There were fines, and there were some other things. You can look those up. They're weird. But he wanted things to be equal. He also implemented a lot of educational reforms that are going to affect future universities like Cambridge and Oxford and so on and so forth. So this pretty much wraps it up for Module 11 of Unit 3. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to close this, and we're going to move on. I'm going to stop the video, and we'll move on to the next module.